There's a special kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather. My name is Blair Olivia, and I learned it from my own family. Just before Thanksgiving, the last one in our ancestral home, my mother sent me a text. "We just don't have the emotional or physical space. It's better if you sit this one out." They had space for my brother's business partners, just not for me. They thought I'd just disappear. They thought I'd sit alone in my sterile Denver apartment. But they forgot about the one thing my grandmother left me: 300 acres of cold, empty, beautiful rage. They told me their table was full. What they didn't know is that I was about to set one for 100 strangers. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The first lie is always the one you tell yourself. You tell yourself the pin-drop silence in your apartment 20 floors above the city is peace. You tell yourself the hollow knot that tightens in your stomach before a family holiday is excitement. You call the silence minimalism and the anxiety anticipation. But the truth, the real truth, is a cold, sharp thing. It has weight, it has edges, and no matter how high you build your walls, it always finds you. It found me on a Tuesday afternoon with the rain streaking in gray lines down the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Denver high-rise. My apartment was a study in sterile white and brushed chrome, a place so clean it felt like no one actually lived here. Sometimes I wasn't sure I did. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic shush of the rain and the faint, almost imperceptible buzz of my phone on the granite countertop. I stared at the screen for a long time before picking it up. It was the family group chat, a place of forced cheer and carefully curated announcements. My mother Claire had just posted. My thumb hovered, then tapped. "So excited for Thanksgiving!" Her text glowed, vibrating with a dozen exclamation points. "Mason and Sam are bringing the new partners from his firm. It's going to be a full, formal affair. We're thrilled. My brother Mason, the golden one, my father David, the proud patriarch, and Sam Mason's perfect wife. A full, formal affair." I could already picture it: the heavy silver, the suffocating scent of my mother's potpourri, the polite, empty laughter. My stomach gave a familiar, painful twist. This year was supposed to be different. This year I was 29, successful by any metric, and maybe, just maybe, I would finally have a real seat. I typed back, my fingers feeling clumsy. "Can't wait. What should I bring?" I hit send, and the group chat died. I watched the screen, the little read-by icons popping up under my message. Mom, Dad, Mason. The cursor in my text box blinked, patient and lonely. 1 minute passed. The rain hammered the glass. 2 minutes. I told myself she was just busy. She was coordinating. She was in the middle of polishing the silver. 3 minutes. 5. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. It was an answer all by itself. Then my phone buzzed again, but it wasn't the group chat. It was a private message from Mom. "Blair, honey, about that." My blood went cold. I knew this tone. This was the gentle, reasonable tone she used before delivering the blow. It's a very important dinner for your father and Mason. The partners are, well, you know, the house is a mess with preparations. We just don't have the emotional or physical space." Emotional space. The words hung there, digital and brutal. "It's better if you sit this one out. We'll make it up at Christmas." A click, a lock, a door swinging shut. Sit this one out. Like I was a bench warmer on the family team. "We'll make it up at Christmas." The same empty promise that had followed me my entire life. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the counter. It wasn't just a gut punch. It was the familiar, dull ache of a bruise that's been pressed in the exact same spot for 20 years. This wasn't new. This was a pattern, a well-worn groove I kept falling into. I squeezed my eyes shut, and the white, sterile apartment dissolved. Suddenly, I was 10 years old again. I was standing in the doorway of the formal dining room in that big ancestral house, the one they were about to sell. The air smelled like lemon oil and old money. My wool sweater was itchy, and the heavy gold-painted trophy in my hands was digging into my palms. It was my first-place win from the state science fair, a complex working model of a solar-powered water purification system. I could still feel the phantom weight of it. My father and Mason were at the table roaring with laughter. Mason, 16 and godlike, had just been given his Letterman jacket. My father was clapping him on the back, his voice booming. "That's my boy. That's the Hart legacy." My mother was already holding a hammer, discussing with my father where to hang the empty picture frame, the one that would soon hold Mason's jacket displayed like a holy relic in the hall. "Mom, Dad," I'd said, my voice too small. "I won." They all turned. The laughter stopped. They looked at the gleaming trophy, then at me. My mother Claire smiled. It was a faint, polite smile, the same one she used for a neighbor's badly behaved child. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her eyes already drifting back to the wall. "It's very technical. Can you put it in your room? It doesn't quite go with the decor." I had stood there for a full minute, the trophy suddenly feeling cheap and heavy, before I turned and walked up the stairs, the sound of their laughter starting up again behind me. I opened my eyes. Back in the high-rise, back in the silence. The rain was turning to sleet. The decor here was mine, all mine, and there wasn't a single family photo to clash with it. This Thanksgiving. This one hurt more. It was the last one. My parents were finally selling the ancestral home, the house where my grandmother, the only person who ever truly saw me, had lived and died. The house was full of her memory, her scent of lavender and old books, and they were selling it to the highest bidder. Mason had handled the details. I was just supposed to show up, be grateful, and say goodbye to the last place on earth that held any real meaning. And now I wasn't even allowed to do that. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. The time for that was long gone. Instead, a strange, cold, sharp clarity settled over me. It was the same clarity that had driven me to build my entire career in sustainable agriculture technology, the same technical field my mother had dismissed. It was the clarity of being once and for all, completely and totally done. I picked up my phone. I didn't open the text from my mother. Instead, I opened an app with a simple icon of a willow tree. A moment later, a security feed flickered to life. It showed the snow-dusted front yard of Willow Creek Ranch, the 300-acre property in the foothills my grandmother had left in secret only to me. It was run-down, wild, and the only thing I truly owned. I'd been quietly restoring it for a year, pouring every spare cent I had into its old bones. The main lodge was almost finished. I watched the wind whip the bare branches of the willow by the frozen pond. I went back to my mother's message. My thumbs moved fast and precise. "I understand." I sent it, then I went to my contacts and hit a different name. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Blair, you okay?" Storms rolling in. Eli's voice was like gravel and warm whiskey. He was the retired sheriff of Sweetwater County, the town near my ranch, and had been my grandmother's oldest friend. "I'm fine, Eli. I'm heading up tonight," I said, my voice even. "I have a question for you. How many people in Sweetwater County are spending Thanksgiving alone?" There was a pause. "What do you mean, alone? You mean the folks at the vet's hall, the night shift nurses at the clinic? Why?" I looked out at the cold, unforgiving city, then back at the image of my empty ranch on the screen. "No, I'm serious," I said, a new, unfamiliar energy thrumming under my skin. "I'm thinking of setting a few extra plates." You can't outrun a bad memory. That's the hard truth. It rides with you, buckled in the passenger seat, its cold hand on the radio. But you can drive towards something better. You can point the nose of your truck away from the skyline that holds your ghosts and push the accelerator until the city lights are just a faint, sickly smear in your rearview mirror. The 3-hour drive from Denver to Willow Creek is the only time I really breathe. The air gets thinner, the highway climbs, and the silence in the cab of my truck stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like freedom. The sterile city falls away, replaced by the raw, honest cold of the high country. The lies get quieter out here. the stars get brighter. I turned off the main highway onto the unmarked county road, the truck's tires crunching on the gravel. Another mile and I was bumping down the long private drive, the headlights cutting through the pitch black and illuminating the familiar silhouette of the ranch house. My ranch. I killed the engine and the silence that rushed in was different from the city's. This was a living quiet full of the scent of pine and frozen earth and the promise of snow on the wind. The main lodge was dark, a great sleeping giant against the foothills. It was still half finished, a skeleton of what it would become, but it was mine. I stepped out of the truck, the cold hitting my face like a slap. A single light was on in the foreman's cabin 100 yards away. As I grabbed my bag, a beam from a heavy-duty flashlight cut through the dark. "That you, Blair?" Eli's voice boomed. "It's me, Eli." He crunched across the yard, a big man in a worn canvas jacket, his face a roadmap of wrinkles under his hat. He was the only person on earth who knew what this place meant to me, the only one who had respected my grandmother enough to respect her baffling decision to leave it to me. "You're up late," he observed, shining the light on the lodge. "Place is cold. I can get the generator fired up if you want." "I'm not staying in the lodge tonight," I said, the words forming as I spoke them. "I'm staying in Grandma's old room in the cabin. I have an idea, Eli. Something I need your help with." "My help you got," he said simply, shouldering my bag like it weighed nothing. "But you look like you're running from a fire." "More like lighting one," I muttered. We'd just stepped onto the cabin's porch when my phone's silent for the whole drive buzzed in my pocket. A new signal pinging off the weak rural tower. I pulled it out. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Mason. I thumbed the screen, my heart hammering. "Hey, Mason." "Blair, hey." His voice was slick and bright, the fake casual tone he used when he was about to twist a knife. "Just checking in, Mom told me you couldn't make it. Total bummer. We'll miss you." Liar. "Yeah, something came up," I said, my voice tight. "Anyway," he steamrolled on. "Just wanted to let you know we're really close to closing on the house sale. The developers are giving us a fantastic offer. I mean, truly incredible. It's a done deal. It's going to set Dad and Mom up for life." The porch boards felt unsteady beneath my feet. "The house? You're really selling it?" He laughed, a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "Don't get sentimental, Blair. It's just bricks and mortar. It's an asset, and it's time to liquidate." Sentimental. The word he'd always used for me like it was a disease. I looked past Eli at the dark, proud silhouette of my lodge, a place built from love and memory, not assets. "In fact," Mason continued, his voice dropping into a confidential murmur, "it's probably for the best you're not coming. You know how you get emotional. We've got the partners from the firm there. It's a big deal for me. It would just make them uncomfortable." Emotional. Uncomfortable. The two words hung in the frozen air. The click was almost audible in my head. A switch being thrown. A circuit finally connecting. This wasn't about a missed dinner. This was about my entire life. This was about being the inconvenient, emotional, sentimental girl who didn't go with the decor. This was about being told to sit down, be quiet, and not make the important people uncomfortable. My hand was shaking, but my voice when it came out was ice. "I have to go, Mason." "Yeah, great catching up." I ended the call. I stood there in the dark, the phone heavy in my hand. Eli was watching me, his expression unreadable. "Bad news?" he asked. "The usual," I said. My breath plumed in front of me. The small, kind idea of setting a few extra plates felt childish. It felt weak. It was another version of me asking for permission. "Eli," I said, turning to him, the energy thrumming under my skin so fast it made me dizzy. "I'm changing the plan. It's not a few extra plates. It's an open invitation. I want everyone. I want the Veterans Hall. I want the nursing home staff who have to work the holiday. I want the drivers from the truck stop on the highway. I want every single person in this county who has nowhere to go." Eli's eyebrows shot up. "Blair, that's a lot more than a few plates. We're talking 100 people. Easy." Good, I said. 100 it is. I pushed past him into the warm wood-paneled cabin. I sat at my grandmother's old roll-top desk, the one that still smelled faintly of lavender. I pulled open my laptop. The Wi-Fi was slow sputtering to life, but it was enough. I opened the browser. I logged into Facebook. I found the page, Sweetwater County Community Board. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This is Blair Olivia from Willow Creek Ranch. My Thanksgiving plans fell through and I have a lodge that's too empty and a kitchen that's too big, so I'm hosting the first annual Willow Creek Community Table. We have 100 seats. No one eats alone. All are welcome. Dinner is at 4 p.m. on Thursday. We have the food. We just need the family. I read it over once. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I moved the cursor. I hit post. For a second, nothing. Just the post sitting there in the digital void. And then a notification popped up at the bottom of the screen. Jenna Miller and one other liked your post. Another one. Mike Sullivan commented, "Is this for real?" Then another. 5 likes. 12 likes. 27. The counter began to tick up, a small, steady digital heartbeat in the mountain silence. My family's love was conditional. It was a currency you had to earn, and the exchange rate was always rigged in their favor. You got a scrap of approval for silencing yourself, a polite nod for staying small, a strained smile for not taking up too much space. It was a cold transactional thing, brittle and easily broken. But the kindness of strangers, that's different. That's a currency built on nothing but shared humanity. It doesn't text you to say you're inconvenient. It just shows up in muddy boots carrying a casserole. 24 hours after I'd hit post, Willow Creek Ranch was unrecognizable. It was no longer a quiet, half-finished project. It was a command center. A hive. It was alive. Trucks I didn't recognize were parked at odd angles in the frozen mud of the yard. The lodge, which had been silent and dark, was now blazing with light, every door thrown open, the sound of laughter and hammering echoing into the valley. The post had exploded. It had been shared, commented on, and passed around every corner of Sweetwater County. And people had started showing up. Not just to eat, but to help. The first to arrive was a woman with a kind, tired face and snow in her dark hair, followed by 4 teenagers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm Maria," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "I teach English at the high school. These 4 need service hours, and I told them this was the only place in town they were getting them today." An hour later, those same 4 kids were arranging rented tables in the main hall, laughing as they argued over where to put the string lights. Then came Hank. He was a grizzled old rancher from 2 valleys over, a man who probably hadn't said more than 10 words to my grandmother in 40 years. He just pulled his ancient flatbed truck up to the lodge, got out, and started unloading a cord of perfectly split firewood onto the porch. When Eli went out to thank him, he just grunted, "Gonna be a cold night." He went back to his truck, pulled out 3 cases of Coors, set them by the wood, and drove away. This was the community my family had always looked down on. The rustic types my mother would dismiss with a wave of her hand. But here they were, a high school teacher and a quiet rancher, offering more real, tangible support in 3 hours than my own parents had in 3 decades. This warm, chaotic, generous community was a roaring fire against the sterile Arctic cold of my family. And I was in the middle of it, in my element. This was logistics. This was a supply chain. This was the work I was good at, the technical stuff that didn't go with the decor. I hadn't slept. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot, I had sawdust on my jeans, and my phone was permanently attached to my ear. "No 15 turkeys isn't a suggestion," I said into my phone, pacing the lodge floor. "It's the bare minimum. Yes, 100-pound bags of potatoes, 4 of them." I clicked over to another call. "I need 3 industrial-grade convection ovens delivered to this address by 8 a.m. tomorrow. Yes, I'll pay the emergency rush fee. Send the invoice." I was paying for the food, the rentals, the power to light this place. But the labor was pure, unadulterated goodwill. People were scrubbing floors, hanging banners, and setting up a makeshift kitchen in the half-finished space, all because a stranger on the internet had said she had too much room. Late in the afternoon, I found a moment of quiet. I was in the kitchen with Maria, the two of us, leaning against a steel prep table, a mountain of potatoes between us. My hands ached as I worked the peeler, the thunk, thunk, thunk of Maria's knife on the cutting board next to me, the only sound. "So," she said, not looking up from her dicing, "that post of yours. What plans exactly fell through, honey, if you don't mind me asking?" I kept my eyes on the potato in my hand, the brown skin curling away. "My family's Thanksgiving." I said the words feeling small and absurd in this big, busy room. My brother's business partners were more important than me this year. Maria's knife stopped. Thunk. She looked at me, her eyes sharp but kind. "Well, that's their loss, isn't it?" She went back to dicing the rhythm, picking up again. "Some families are the ones you're born into. The good ones," she said, nudging a pile of diced potatoes into a giant bowl, "are the ones you build." I felt a sudden sharp sting behind my eyes. I blinked it back, nodding. "We're going to need more bowls." I stepped outside onto the porch to grab a new bin, taking a deep breath of the freezing air. And that's when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a local number. It was my mother. I stepped further into the cold, my stomach turning to ice. I answered it. "Hi, Mom." "Blair Olivia." Her voice was a high-pitched, frantic whisper, like she was afraid of being overheard. "What is this? What have you done? What are you talking about?" "A public post," she hissed. "On the internet, your Aunt Karen saw it. She sent it to me. People from your father's old firm, Blair, they are asking questions. They're calling David. They're asking if everything is all right." I looked through the window at the lodge at Maria, and her students laughing at Eli and Hank's sons carrying in tables. "Everything's fine, Mom. I'm just busy." "Busy, it looks desperate." She spat the word desperate, loaded with a lifetime of shame. "It makes you look unloved. It makes us look bad, like we abandoned you." I looked up at the vast, uncaring twilight sky, the first stars beginning to poke through. The gap between her world and mine had just become a canyon. "I'm just feeding people, Mom," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the frozen ground. "You should try it sometime." I hung up before she could reply. I stood there, shaking my hand clenched around the phone. As I went to put it in my pocket, it buzzed again, this time with a text notification. A new number, a Denver area code. "Ms. Olivia, my name is Mark Bridges. I'm a reporter with the Denver Post. We got a tip about your Feast of the Forgotten at Willow Creek Ranch. We'd love to talk to you about it." It was Thanksgiving Eve, and the ranch was no longer a construction site. It was a sanctuary. The main lodge had been transformed. We had hung what felt like miles of string lights, and they cast a warm golden glow across the raw wood beams, reflecting off the mismatched silverware and plates that volunteers had brought from their own homes. The long, rented tables filled the main hall, a silent promise of the meal to come. Outside, the world was disappearing. The wind had risen from a whisper to a howl, a low, keening shriek that meant the blizzard was no longer a threat, it was a reality. The first icy pellets of snow, hard as pebbles, had begun to tick, tick, tick against the new windows. The storm was rolling in fast and hard, and it was wrapping us in, sealing us off from the rest of the world. The lodge buzzed with the frantic, joyful energy of the last-minute preparations. Maria was directing the high schoolers. Eli was on the phone with the snowplow guy. The air was thick with the scent of chopped onions, sage, and the first of the pies baking in the new ovens. But I needed a minute. I needed air. I pulled my coat tight and slipped out the back door, heading for the one place I knew would be silent, the old barn. The wind nearly tore the heavy door from my hand as I wrestled it open and shut. Inside, it was freezing, the air still and heavy with the scent of old hay leather and thyme. I leaned against the rough wood, my breath pluming in front of me. My grandmother always said this ranch was a place for lost things. Driftwood, stray animals, broken hearts. She said it was a place where things that had been discarded could find their value again. I never fully understood it until now. Standing in the middle of that vast dark barn, listening to the storm rage against its roof, I realized we were all just a room full of lost things waiting to be found. My small flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the old tack room. Under a dusty canvas tarp, I saw the edge of her trunk, the big leather-bound one with her initials EMO embossed in faded gold. I ran my glove over the cold brass latch. I hadn't had the strength to open it since the funeral. Tonight I did. The hinges creaked, protesting the cold. Inside, nestled among a pair of worn riding gloves, a faded blue ribbon from a long-ago county fair, and the sharp, clean scent of cedar was her journal. It was thick, leather-bound, and worn as soft as fabric. My fingers were numb, but I fumbled it open. It fell to a page marked with a single pressed willow leaf. Her handwriting, strong and black and sure, filled the page. I held the light steady and read. "David and Claire are good people," she'd written. "But they are weak. They are terrified of Mason's ambition, and they see strength as a threat. They don't see the steel in Blair. They never have. She is the one who will carry this family's real legacy: resilience. Not ambition, not appearances, but pure, unbending resilience. That's why I'm leaving her Willow Creek. It's the only place big enough to hold her heart." I sank back on my heels, the journal heavy in my lap. The words knocked the air from my lungs. She saw me. While my parents were busy polishing their golden sun, my grandmother had seen the steel. A fire had just been lit inside my chest, a furnace of purpose that burned away all the old lingering doubt, all the whispers of emotional and uncomfortable. I didn't know how long I sat there in the dark, but my phone buzzing in my pocket finally snapped me out of it. It wasn't just a buzz. It was a frenzy vibrating angrily against my leg. I pulled it out, a dozen texts, 5 missed calls, and a link sent from a Denver number I didn't recognize. I clicked it. The Denver Post logo loaded. The headline was a punch straight to the gut: "Reclamation heiress snubbed by family hosts, Feast of the Forgotten at Ancestral Ranch." My face, a candid shot from my old ag tech bio, was plastered next to a file photo of my parents' sprawling ancestral home. The story was a masterpiece of implication, painting me as a tragic, generous heroine and my family as the cold-hearted villains who had cast me out. It was sentimental, it was dramatic, and it was going viral. Before I could even process the slick, pitying tone of the article, the phone rang again, vibrating violently in my hand. Mason. I stood up, the journal still clutched in my other hand, and answered. It wasn't a hello, it was a roar. "A feast of the forgotten," he screamed, his voice so loud it distorted through the speaker. "Are you insane? The partners saw it. My boss saw it, Blair. They're forwarding it around the entire firm. They think our family is unstable. You've humiliated us. You are ruining the house sale, you selfish." "I'm ruining what, Mason?" My voice was quiet, dead calm. The steel my grandmother wrote about was pressing against my tongue. "Your payday. The house you were selling without even telling me you were closing the deal. It's Dad's house, not yours. It's not my fault Grandma left you this dump. You made it perfectly clear I'm not family this week, Mason." I cut him off. "So I'm celebrating with my community. Do not call me again." I pressed the block button. A profound, shuddering silence filled my ears, louder than the wind. I'd done it. I'd cut the rope. I shoved the phone deep into my coat pocket. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't cold. I walked out of the barn and into the full force of the blizzard. The snow was a white wall, swirling and disorienting. But through the chaos, I saw it. Headlights. 2 weak yellow beams crawling up the long driveway, barely visible in the storm. I ran to the lodge, my boots slipping in the accumulating snow. Eli was already at the door, peering out. The headlights belonged to a battered old sedan, the kind of car that had no business being on a mountain road in a storm like this. It slid to a stop, its engine coughing. A man got out wearing a jacket so thin it looked like a flannel shirt. He was clutching the hand of a small child in a threadbare coat. A woman holding a baby wrapped in what looked like a bath towel got out of the passenger side. The man looked at me, his face a mask of terror and shame. "Ma'am," he called over the wind, his teeth chattering. We saw the post. On Facebook. Our car. The heater broke. We have nowhere to go. We just need to get warm." I looked at this small, frozen family, the real lost things my grandmother had talked about. I stepped back and pulled the heavy lodge door wide open. The warm air, thick with the smell of roasting garlic and baking pies, flooded out into the storm. "Welcome," I said, my voice thick. "You're right on time." By 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, the blizzard wasn't just a storm. It was a living, breathing thing. It was a white monster howling at the windows, piling snow against the doors, and shaking the very bones of the lodge. But inside, we were an ark. Inside, we were safe. The lodge was packed, a chaotic, beautiful, breathing mass of humanity. It wasn't just 100 people. It was more. 120, maybe 150. The family from the night before, their car now buried in a snowdrift, were sitting by the fire, their kids playing with a donated toy truck. Hank, the quiet rancher, was locked in a deep conversation with the young family's father. Maria was running the food line like a general, her high school students now laughing and joking with strangers as they handed out plates. The air was thick and hot with the smell of 15 roasted turkeys of sage and thyme and buttery mashed potatoes and bubbling pies. It was the loudest, warmest, most wonderful room I had ever been in. This is the moment. This is the moment a story turns. You spend your whole life as the supporting character in someone else's narrative. You're the quiet daughter, the weird sister, the afterthought. You're just a ghost at the table, a placeholder until the real guests arrive. You're polite, you're small, you're emotional, and you don't go with the decor. And then one day you wake up, you realize you're not in their story at all. They're just intruders in yours. We were in the middle of the meal. A man I'd never met was playing a fiddle by the fire, the music bright and fast, weaving through the thunderous, joyful noise of 100 people talking and eating. I was standing near the kitchen, a dish towel over my shoulder, just watching, just breathing it in. And then a man near the center table tapped his glass with a fork. The room slowly, generously quieted down. The fiddle music softened. He was a young man, maybe my age, in a wheelchair. I'd seen him arrive earlier with a group from the vet's hall. He looked nervous, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, but his voice was clear. I don't know most of you," he said, his voice shaking just a little. "My name is Mike." "Hi, Mike," a few people called out. He smiled, a shaky, real smile. "Hi, I just wanted to say, I haven't sat at a table with this many people since I left Kandahar. I haven't wanted to. For a long time this day was just one to get through, a day to shut the blinds and wait for it to be over." The room was absolutely silent now, save for the roar of the wind outside. "But tonight," he said, and his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and went on stronger now. "Tonight I look around this room and I see a lot of people I don't know, but I don't see a single stranger. This is family." He raised his plastic cup of cider. "This is what it's supposed to be." He looked directly at me across the sea of faces. "Thank you, Blair, for seeing us." For a second there was silence. The weight of his words settled over us. And then Hank, the old rancher, started to clap. Not a polite clap, but a solid, slow, powerful thud, thud, thud of his calloused hands. Then Maria. Then the kids. And then the entire room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar. It was a tidal wave of sound and gratitude and relief, so powerful it physically pushed me back a step. I put my hand over my mouth and the tears I'd been holding back for my entire life finally came. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of release, I was crying for the 10-year-old girl with the trophy for the 29-year-old woman in the silent high-rise. And for the fact that for the first time, I was completely, truly seen. And that was the moment the main door of the lodge burst open. It wasn't a gentle opening. It was a violent shove, a blast of icy wind and swirling snow that ripped through the room, extinguishing the candles on the front tables and making the string lights dance wildly. The music stopped. The applause died. The laughter cut off, replaced by a collective sharp gasp. Standing in the doorway, framed by the white chaos of the blizzard, were my family. My father David, his face pale and rigid. My mother Claire, her hand clutching the collar of her designer wool coat, her eyes wide with a kind of horror I had only ever seen in movies. And behind them, Mason and his wife Sam. They were all dressed in expensive, immaculate cashmere, their hair perfectly in place, looking like 4 statues of ice dropped into our warm, chaotic, messy world. They stared aghast at the room full of strangers, at the mismatched plates, at the weeping veteran, at me. My mother's eyes found mine. She took a step in her heel, sinking into the welcome mat. "Blair Olivia," she whispered, her voice trembling with a cold, sharp fury that cut through the silence. "What is this?" I wiped the tears from my face, not with a tissue, but with the back of my hand. I felt the steel my grandmother had written about click into place in my spine. I took a step toward them, out of the kitchen into the center of the room. My room. My guests. My family. "It's Thanksgiving, Mom," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried. "You said your table was full, so I set my own." "Full?" Mason shoved past my mother, his face a mask of purple rage. He jabbed a finger not at me, but at the room. At Mike. At Maria. At the kids by the fire. "This isn't a table, Blair. This is a circus. This is a freak show. You did this to humiliate us." The entire lodge held its breath. Before I could say a word, a large shape moved from my right. Eli. He stepped in front of Mason, not touching him, but planting himself like an old-growth tree. He was a full foot taller and 100 pounds heavier, and he looked at my brother like he was a misbehaving child. "Son," Eli's voice boomed deep and calm, "you're interrupting dinner." He gestured with his thumb toward the food line. "You're welcome to a plate, but you'll lower your voice and show respect in this house." Mason looked at Eli, then at me, then back at Eli, sputtering, his self-importance warring with his shock. He couldn't believe this. This hired help was challenging him. "This isn't a house," Mason finally spat, his voice cracking with rage. "It's a joke. There's a sound a family makes when it breaks. It's not a scream. It's not a thunderclap. It's a whisper. It's the sound of 100,000 unspoken betrayals, a million tiny paper cuts finally being said out loud. It's the sound of a foundation cracking, a silence so total and so heavy it sucks all the air out of the room. That was the sound in the lodge. 150 people had become a silent jury, their forks frozen, their eyes wide, watching the 4 intruders who had brought the storm inside with them. The only sound was the howling wind and the sharp, angry crackle of the fire. My father David finally moved. He stepped past Eli, his face a tight mask of patrician fury. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking only at me. "Blair," he said, his voice low and shaking with a cold I had never heard before. "This stunt ends now. The partners pulled out. They called me an hour ago. The house deal is dead. Because of you. Because of this embarrassment." So that was it. Not the betrayal, not the holiday, not the family, the money, the asset. "It's dead," I said, and a strange, wild laugh almost escaped me. "Good." His head snapped back as if I'd slapped him. "Good. Good." I repeated, my voice stronger now. "You were selling my grandmother's legacy. You were selling the last piece of this family that meant anything, and you were doing it to impress men who don't even know your name. You were liquidating our memories, Mason." "She left you this dump." Mason finally roared, his composure shattering. He jabbed his finger at the log walls, at the string lights, at me. She left me with the responsibility. While you were off playing in your fantasy world, her little pet, I was the one doing the real work. I was the one holding this family together. And there it was. The final rotten, festering truth laid bare on the floor of my lodge. The truth that had been hiding under the rug my entire life. It wasn't about love or hate. It was about jealousy. It was about his sense of responsibility versus my perceived freedom. He didn't just resent me. He hated me for being the one my grandmother had trusted, for being the one she had seen. The click in my head was deafening. Everything, the science fair trophy, the emotional label, the empty seat at the table, it all locked into place. Holding it together, I whispered, taking a step toward him. Or just taking everything you wanted all my life. All my life, Mason. I just wanted you to see me. I just wanted a seat. I tore my eyes from his and looked at my parents, who were standing there frozen, two pillars of weak, cold denial. I just wanted a seat at the table. But I was never as smart as Mason. I was never as charming as Mason. I was never as important as Mason's next deal. I looked at my mother, her hand still at her throat. You said you didn't have space. The emotional space. That's what you texted me. I took another step, closing the distance between us. The entire room was watching. The truth is, I said, my voice breaking, but not with sadness, with pure hot rage. You just didn't have space for me. Honey, that's not... My mother, Claire, finally stammered. Her eyes were wide, pleading. The first false tears began to well. That's not true. We love you. You know we love you. No. The word was so quiet, so absolute, it silenced her more effectively than a shout. I looked from her to my father to my brother. I felt the gaze of all 150 people at my back, a wall of warmth and support. I wasn't the 10-year-old girl anymore. No, I said again, my voice clear and ringing through the silent lodge. Love doesn't put a closed sign on the door. Love doesn't tell you to sit this one out. Love doesn't decide you're not important enough for the formal dinner. Love doesn't text you, Mom. It shows up. I turned, my arms sweeping out to encompass the entire packed, messy, beautiful room. This is love. This is Mike, who hasn't felt safe on Thanksgiving in 10 years. This is Maria, who spent 2 days peeling potatoes for people she doesn't even know. This is Hank, who brought firewood just because he knew it would be cold. This is a room full of people who showed up. This is community. This is what you were supposed to teach me, but you were too busy. I looked at my father, managing assets. I held their gaze for one last second. I saw my father's shock. I saw my mother's crumbling denial. I saw Mason's pure, unadulterated hatred, and I felt nothing. The ache was gone. The part of me that had been wired to seek their approval had just been cauterized. I turned my back on them, fully, completely. I faced the room. I'm so sorry, everyone, I said, my voice catching for real this time. Dinner's getting cold. I turned to Eli, who was still standing like a mountain by the door. Eli, I said, my voice low but clear. Please show them out, they're cold. My family was stunned into silence. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Mason sputtered, You can't kick us out. Eli just nodded at me once. He didn't move toward Mason. He simply moved to the door and pulled it wide open. The blizzard roared into the room again, a wall of screaming white. Time to go, Eli said. This is her. Mason started, but another shape moved. Hank the rancher stood up from his table. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and stood next to Eli. Two big, silent, immovable men holding the door open to the storm. My father defeated his face. Gray grabbed my mother's arm. Claire, we're leaving. He pulled her toward the door. Mason gave me one last look of pure venom, then turned and stalked out, shouldering Sam with him. They stepped out of the light, out of the warmth, and were swallowed by the storm. Eli and Hank put their shoulders to the heavy door and shoved it shut. The thud of the bolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. I stood there, my back to the room, shaking so hard I thought my knees would buckle. It was done. I was alone. Then a small, warm hand touched my shoulder. I flinched, then looked. It was Maria. She didn't say anything. She just squeezed. From my other side, a sound. Mike the vet had wheeled himself up beside me. He just sat there, a quiet, steady presence. The lodge was silent for a beat. 2. Then from the corner the soft, hesitant notes of the fiddle started up again. A low, sweet, gentle melody. I wasn't alone at all. The storm broke in more ways than one. When I finally woke up on the cot I'd set up in the lodge's office, it wasn't to the sound of the wind. It was to the sound of laughter and the smell of coffee. I sat up, my entire body aching, and looked out the small window. The blizzard had passed. The sun was out, a brilliant, blinding white eye in a painfully blue sky, illuminating a world that had been completely erased and redrawn in snow. The silence was absolute, a thick, clean blanket over everything. And for the first time in my life, so was my head. The anger, the hurt, the noise, the screaming voice of my brother, and the pleading whispers of my mother. It was all gone. There was just quiet. I walked out into the main hall. It looked like the aftermath of the best party in the world. People were asleep everywhere, on couches, on air mattresses, on piles of coats by the still roaring fire. The blizzard had trapped all 150 of us. No one was getting down this mountain today. But the atmosphere wasn't one of panic. It was one of strange, sleepy camaraderie. In the kitchen, Maria and Hank were already wide awake, presiding over a breakfast of leftover pie and scrambled eggs made from a donated flat. "Morning, boss," Hank grunted, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. People were slowly stirring, stretching, and then grabbing shovels. A dozen men led by Eli were outside, already beginning the massive, impossible task of digging out a pathway and freeing the buried cars, their laughter carrying on the sharp, clean air. The young family from the broken-down car was sitting at a table with Mike the vet. Their little boy was asleep in Mike's lap, and Mike was just staring into the fire, a look of such profound peace on his face that it made my chest ache. By mid-morning, the news truck had somehow made it back, this time with a reinforced plow clearing the way. But they didn't shove a camera in my face. The reporter Mark Bridges found me by the coffee pot. "Ms. Olivia," he said, his tone entirely different from the day before. "The story's changed a lot." He pointed with his pen. "We're not here for you. Not really. We're here for this." He and his cameraman spent the next 2 hours interviewing the guests. They talked to Maria about community. They talked to Hank about neighbors. They talked to the young father who, with a new job offer from Hank already in his pocket, spoke with a shaky voice about grace. And they talked to Mike. I watched from the window as Mike sat in his chair, the bright sun on his face, and told his story. He didn't just talk about being left out. He talked about being brought in. He talked about what it felt like to be seen. That interview, I'd find out later, was the clip that went truly viral. The narrative had shifted, just as Mark said. It was no longer the feast of the forgotten, a pity story about a snubbed heiress. It had become the miracle at Willow Creek, a story about the resilience and power of the Sweetwater community. I left them to it. I finally found a quiet corner in the barn, the one place I knew would be empty, and sat on an old hay bale, my phone in my hand. I watched the local news clip of Mike, and then I saw an email in my inbox. The sender name made my heart stop. Aunt Karen. My mother's sister, the one who had, according to my mother, seen the post and started the drama. I opened it, my hand trembling. "Blair," it read. "I'm sitting here watching the news and I can't stop crying. Your grandmother, oh kiddo, she would be so, so proud of you. I'm proud of you. You did the one thing our family was always too scared to do. You told the truth." I took a shaky breath, but there was more. "P.S." she'd written. "Don't you let them guilt you about that house deal. I had lunch with your father last Tuesday. The developers found a massive crack in the foundation. The deal fell through last week. Mason was just looking for someone to blame. As usual. Don't let it be you. Come see me when you're back in Denver. We have 30 years of catching up to do. I read the postscript 3 times. Last week, the deal was already dead. The rage, the screaming, the humiliation from my father and brother, it was all a lie. It was a performance staged to put me back in my box to make me the scapegoat for their failure. But the old familiar sting of betrayal didn't come. I felt no anger. I felt no sorrow. All I felt was a profound cold and final clarity. The last chain, the last tiny thread of obligation that had tethered me to them just evaporated. I wasn't sad. I was free. I was finally completely and irreversibly free. I walked back into the lodge past the news crew, past the laughing volunteers, and into my small office. I sat down at my laptop. I pushed aside the spreadsheets for my ag tech job. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked on the white screen. I thought about my grandmother's journal about her words. Resilience, steel, a place big enough to hold her heart. I typed a title at the top of the page. The Willow Creek Foundation, a center for rural resilience and community. A business plan began to form in my mind, a place for education, for food security, for veteran support for community. A place that would do this what we'd just done every single day, not just on a holiday. I was so lost in the work and the sudden powerful flood of purpose that I almost missed the buzz of my phone on the desk. A text, a new number, not Denver, not Sweetwater. This is Sam. My blood ran cold. Sam, Mason's wife. I left him. This morning. I took the kids, and I left. What you did. What you said. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I'm sorry. For everything. 1 year later, the snow was falling again. But this time, it wasn't a raging blizzard. It was a gentle, quiet descent of soft, fat flakes drifting lazily onto the roof of a lodge that was no longer a half-finished project, but a home. The first year I set the table out of spite. The second year I set it with purpose. Willow Creek Ranch was no longer a secret. It was a landmark. The old rotting sign at the end of the drive had been replaced by a new one carved from solid oak, the Willow Creek Foundation, a center for rural resilience and community. The open sign beneath it was permanent. In the past year, my life had been completely rebuilt from the studs up. I lived here full-time. The sterile white high-rise in Denver was a distant memory, an empty shell I'd sold without a second thought. My ag tech job had been scaled back to a remote consulting role. My real work was here. The lodge was alive not just for one night, but for all of them. The second annual Willow Creek Community Table was underway, and the warm golden light spilling from its windows was a beacon in the twilight. It was bigger, more organized. The chaotic scramble of that first year had given way to a joyful, efficient hum. We had a real commercial kitchen now funded by grants, and a flood of donations that had poured in after Mike's interview went national. Eli, now retired for good, was the foundation's chairman, and he was currently directing traffic in the plowed parking lot with the air of a 4-star general. Maria ran our new educational programs, tutoring kids from all over the county in the lodge's library, which had been built and stocked entirely by volunteers. I stood by the massive stone fireplace, watching the room swell with people, 200, maybe more this year. Mike the vet was rolling through the crowd, his face bright, handing out hot cider. He was our head of veteran outreach. Hank was in the kitchen, carving one of the 20 turkeys, his quiet presence a cornerstone of this whole operation. We were a well-oiled machine, a family built not from blood, but from shared purpose and a deep, abiding respect. I had never felt so calm, so strong, so rooted in my entire life. I belonged. I was heading toward the kitchen when Eli tapped me on the shoulder, his face unreadable in the firelight. Blair, he said, his voice a low rumble. You got visitors. He nodded toward the front door. My heart didn't stop. It didn't clench. It just gave a single hard beat. I turned. A battered old sedan, a model I didn't recognize, was idling at the edge of the drive, its headlights cutting weakly through the gentle snow. Two figures got out. They were alone. They looked small. They looked old. It was David and Claire. They stood there for a long moment, just watching the light and listening to the waves of laughter and music spill out of the lodge. They looked like refugees. My mother was clutching something to her chest, a pie, I realized, in a cheap aluminum tin from a grocery store. A peace offering. My father, his shoulders slumped in his old wool coat, just stared at the sign over the door. I walked out onto the porch, wiping my hands on my apron. The cold air felt good. They flinched when they saw me, like two deer spotting a hunter. Blair. My mother's voice was thin, a whisper that the snow almost swallowed. We saw the sign in town. We didn't know if... Her voice trailed off. She held up the pie. We brought... It's apple. My father just looked at the ground, then at me, then at the ground again. It smells good, he said, his voice gravelly. It smells... warm. We don't have anywhere else to go. I waited. The old Blair, the 10-year-old with the trophy, the 29-year-old in the silent apartment would have filled this silence. She would have raged or cried or, worst of all, offered a brittle, polite forgiveness that cost her everything. I was no longer that person. Mason's in... Well, he's not around. My father mumbled the admission, costing him a visible shred of his pride. After Sam had left him taking the kids and a good lawyer, his life had apparently unraveled with spectacular speed. The house had been repossessed, the responsibility he'd lorded over me proving to be a mountain of debt. They stood there, two lost things at the edge of my bright, warm, full world. I looked at them, at their tired faces and their cheap pie, and the last faint echo of the old pain, the one that had lived in my chest for 20 years, finally dissolved. It wasn't a wound anymore. It wasn't even a scar. It was just a story about someone else. Blair, my mother whispered again, her eyes glassy with unshed tears, finally understanding that I was not going to make this easy for them. I looked past them at the full lodge, at the people laughing and sharing tables at the home I had built. I looked back at my parents. There's always space at this table, Mom, I said, my voice clear and kind but not familiar. It was the voice of the woman who owned the lodge. But the seats aren't assigned. Her face crumpled in confusion. What? I nodded toward the open door, toward the wall of sound and light. You'll have to find one for yourselves. I left them there on the porch. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I walked back inside, the warmth of my home enveloping me. I saw them a moment later, drift in through the doorway, two small, hesitant shadows in the blazing light. They paused, looking terrified, and lost two strangers in a room of 200. Then a volunteer I didn't even know, a new face from town, smiled at them and pointed toward the food. My parents, humbled and anonymous, shuffled into the line, just two more faces in the crowd. I watched them for a second, then turned my back. The kitchen was calling. Hank held up the carving knife, offering it to me. I smiled, took it, and walked to the head of the serving line. "Who's ready for turkey?" I called out, and a cheer went up from the room. I looked out at the sea of faces my family and I began to serve. And so Blair finally found her home, not in the house she lost, but in the community she built. What did you think of her journey from isolation to empowerment? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We truly read every single one. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.